Chapter 57, Update Questions 1. I recently came across your website and a lot of the information shared resonated with me. I have a few questions. In the 7-year fasting program, what are the guidelines for pregnant women? Would you continue eating every 3 days while with child? Also, I have completed 7 and 21-day fasting programs in the past. Once you reach the point of eating once every 3 days, are liquids okay in between this time? What about water and juices? How strict are the guidelines, etc.? Thank you for your time.
Hi, a pregnant woman should go back to eating once or twice or thrice a day. As soon as she discovers she's pregnant, she should start eating once every 2 days, assuming she was eating once every 3 days. Do that for about 2 weeks. Then eat once a day for another 2 weeks, then twice a day for 2 or 3 weeks, and so on until she's back to her previous schedule. Then keep it until after she stops breastfeeding. Then go back slowly to the normal schedule of once every 3 days by going 2 or 3 weeks at a time. When you're in the 3 day schedule or the other schedules before that, juices are okay to drink during the fast. You can start with the heavy juices such as vegetable juices, carrot juice, orange, banana purees, etc. After a few months, cut down on the heavy juices and start taking light juices like apple juice, grape juice, lemonade, etc. The purpose of a fast is to rest the stomach. Digestion requires a lot of energy. That's why people usually doze off to sleep after a heavy meal. That's the stomach's way of taking over the whole body's energy so it can do its work. It doesn't even want the person awake enough to think because even thinking takes too much energy. So by fasting, we give the stomach a rest and we take back our energy. And that way, the body can use this extra energy to heal itself and do other things without being burdened by the process of digestion, which is constant 24/7 in some people who never fast. Hence, even heavy juices should ultimately be avoided. In the end, after you have been on this 3 day schedule for a few years, you can cut the heavy juices and only take light juices between meals. Even then, don't drink the juice all day long. The same applies to water. Use it only 2 or 3 times a day, about 1 glass at a time.
Thank you for getting back to me. Do you have a reference or a resource regarding the diet and fast, or where I can find medical evidence that the adult body takes 72 hours to metabolize? Would a holistic practitioner or nutritionalist be supportive or familiar with this regimen? Also, when will more Blackroots lessons become available on your website?
I'll start posting more updates and questions again a bit later. Have you finished the whole book? Check the internet for any information regarding metabolism, but I doubt you'll find anything about this aspect of it. Scientists don't know this information. They know about the general metabolic rates of foods, but not about that of the poisons in all foods. In fact, most don't even know that all foods contain some amount of poisons in them. If they were to find out that the metabolic rate for such poison is 3 days, do you think they'd publish information encouraging people to eat only once every 3 days? They'd put the restaurant and grocery and farming establishments out of business. But do a study on the web. You might just find the evidence you're looking for.
Yes, I've finished the book, and of course, I plan to read it again. But what steps can be taken if I'm interested in learning this knowledge firsthand? I assume that the diet should also be vegetarian. What are the standards for eating meat, and what is a true vegetarian diet?
Do the second level. It's designed to lead you to the first knower in you. You can eat a little meat if your body cannot do without it. Don't eat it every day, maybe twice or 3 times a week until you're while you're working on the 7-year fasting plan. Read How to Eat to Live by Elijah Muhammad. It will give you a good idea of which foods are good to eat and which are not.
Hello, brother. Your online book is excellent. I have a few questions. It states in the Bible that it is unlawful to commit fornication or to lust after a woman in your heart who is not your wife. The consequences of committing these sins, as well as others, and disregarding Yahweh's laws, according to the biblical teachings, is eternal damnation and the second death and lake of fire for all perpetual violators, irrespective of persons. So, my two questions are: 1. Do you believe the laws of Moses and the messages about the consequences of sin, being damnation and spiritual death, apply to all people, or just the redeeming of the non Black races, since Blacks are the original gods? And 2, Is it possible that some blacks can actually experience the lower levels of Yahweh's heavens, even if briefly, i.e., people who reported dying and being either in hell or on their way to hell and coming back from the near death experience with great fear, a vivid recollection of the experience, and sometimes a complete conversion to Christianity? Thanks again for all of your wonderful info.
Those punishments you mentioned were directed at the non Black races, so the punishment of eternal damnation applies only to them. The reason is because with them, such behavior is not an imitation, but is rather inborn or natural, so it's near impossible for them to give it up once they get started in it. With Black people, it's always imitative behavior and is easily shed once they enter their natural condition in the mental worlds. So the eternal damnation or second death is really a self destruction brought on by the fact that they willfully refuse to give up such behavior. All Black people, except children, do go to the hells for 3 days after they ascend. Every person has sinned to some extent or another. It's not possible to remove the stains of these sins immediately. Hence, we are pulled to that place by the desires that led us to commit those sins. So we all go there for 3 days and experience the spiritual fire whose purpose is to cleanse us. This doesn't necessarily mean we will suffer during that time. If a person does not identify himself with his sins, then he will undergo that ritual with quite a detached state of mind and will see that it's simply a cleansing experience from beginning to end. But if he identifies with it and believes he is a sinner and not a God, then the experience will cause some suffering. But every single Black person always becomes enlightened after 3 days and experiences ends.
One question that comes to mind: is this 3 days the same 3 24-hour days we experience? Or is it possible that it's actually 3,000 years in heaven or hell? Because I was told that a day is as 1,000 years to the Creator. And since we only experience this 24 hours because of our planet's distance in relation to its rotation around our sun, perhaps the heavenly or hellish realms has or is a planet of a lighter or higher frequency or less dense mental substance that rotates further from their sun and has a planet and sun much larger than ours, causing days to be much longer. On the other hand, if there is no time in Yahweh's heavens or hells or on that planet, then what reference do we use for the length of days, hours, etc.? Maybe this is why many people believe hell is eternal for all, because from an occupant's vantage point, a few seconds here on earth could be experienced as years in hell. Thanks ahead of time.
You're right in that part of your analysis. Time in the mental realms is completely subjective. There are no orbiting planets, so there's no way to measure time like that. The 3 days is from our vantage point on Earth. If you could see a beloved of yours who has passed on, you would see them enter the hellish realms and then exit them after 3 days. But to them, it could be 3 minutes or 3 years, depending on how they interpret the experience. If it causes them suffering, then it will seem like 3 years because, as you know from your own experience, time passes very slowly when one is suffering, but zooms by extremely fast when one is in a state of joy.
Another couple of questions that come to mind, and if the answers have been covered in the online Blackroots science book, please just let me know and I'll gladly look them up. Number one, since all blacks upon ascension go to the hell, world, or worlds of the mental realm for 3 Earth days, subjective experience possibly seeming much, much longer, to spiritually burn off any sin, evil, or imperfection, why should Black people, who are eternal gods, make an effort while on earth to avoid the pleasurable things that are forbidden in the Bible, like fornicating, lying, adultery, etc., since Blacks, who have all participated in some act of sin in their life, are all going to hell, at least for a little while anyway? Does more or different acts of sin give you more or different types of suffering in hell, or increase your sentence past the 3 days? Or is it the case that no matter how many sinful acts you participate in, you just get 3 days?
People who don't make an effort to be righteous and who live a life of willful sin will have a huge problem in the mental realm when they try to get rid of the desires that led them to sin. We all have these desires. In ancient Egypt, they were represented by the god Set. He is the god of desires, and his adversary is Horus, who represents our will to do good. We are in a constant, never-ending battle between these two forces in us. Set always leads us to follow our desires, no matter what they are, and Horus always tries to direct us away from sinful desires into good ones. This battle between the two gods rages inside every human being in this age. When a person takes the sides of Set and rejects the advice of Horus, then they end up identifying with those desires that lead them astray. When the time comes to remove them through the fires of purification, it feels to them as though a part of them is being torn away by force. It's as if someone were trying to try and rip your heart right out of your chest. The pain will be unbearable, hence the suffering. When a person has tried here on earth to balance the forces of Set and Horus and partake only of those desires that lead to overall good and shun those that lead to sin, then those evil desires that exist in him are like a foreign substance to him. He welcomes their removal just like a person who has a cancer welcomes its removal by a competent doctor who can do it with little or no pain. That's how it will be for them in the hellish realm. It all starts here on earth as to what attitude each person has towards sin and whether they identify with it or not. Now, as I said before, on earth, one can pretend to be what he is not, but in the mental realms, it is not possible to pretend. Each one's suffering will be in direct proportion to how much he or she loves the simple desires. With Black people, the lesson is learned very quickly within 3 days because these desires are not a fundamental part of our nature. With the non-Black races, it's infinitely more difficult because they are taught from childhood to follow their nature, which is by and large evil.
Number 2. I believe it was stated in Blackroots science that the land of Israel at the time of Herod, etc., had a mix of non-Black races and Blacks in that land. If so, which group was with Moses or Musa when he led them out of Egypt, traveled in the desert for 40 years, and received the covenant or promise from Yahweh Yaqub, basically stating that if they followed all the commandments, including the observance of covenant feast days and Passover, he would be their God and they would be his people forever. And were they led, pillar of fire by night, cloud by day, by Yahweh Yaqub, the creator of the non-Black races, via a spaceship?
The story of Exodus, as reported in the Bible, is a confusion of two stories. One of them is a prophecy about the present Israelites in the West, and the other is a misunderstanding of a historical event that happened long before the Old Testament was transcribed. I'll start with the second one. This is the story of Moses leading the non-Black race people out of Europe into the promised land of North Africa in the Middle East. They had been promised by Yahweh at the time of their making on the island of Paran that they would be led to the promised land where it was their destiny to rule the world. They first went into the promised lands 6,000 years ago. As soon as they got there, they totally rejected Yahweh's teachings and resorted to their true nature. They quickly became very disruptive to the original inhabitants and caused so much mischief that the king of that time expelled them from his cities. That's when they were incarcerated beyond the Caucasus Mountains for 2,000 years. After that amount of time had passed, their savior Moses was born, and he went to bring them back to civilization so they could fulfill their destiny. It took him 40 years to march them from the mountains across the desert and into the Middle East. During that exodus, he taught them the mores of civilization and the laws of Yahweh that they had rejected long ago. It was also during that time that whenever they picked up their belongings to continue the march after camping for several months, they were indeed led by the angels of Yahweh in a spacecraft. I don't know if you have ever seen a UFO, but at night the energy field that surrounds them gives off a light that looks like a flame or what modern people would liken to neon lights. The ancient people likened it to the colors of a flame because as the energy increases or decreases, the color changes just like a flame going through the entire spectrum of reds, yellows, and blues. So the people then call it a pillar of fire. During the day, the colors are not so easy to see. All that can be seen is the sun's reflection off of its surface, which causes it to look white like a cloud. Hence, even up to the time of Jesus, they were called the clouds of heaven. As Jesus said in Matthew 24:30, where he was talking about Yahweh, the Son of Man, coming in the clouds of heaven in great power and glory at the end of the age. That's the first story of the Exodus of Moses and the Caucasians. The second story was an ancient prophecy about the present Israelites. They will be led by their modern Moses from the desert of self forgetfulness into the promised land of the knowledge of their ancestors. This exodus will also take 40 years to complete, starting around the year 2010. In that year, the knowledge of Yahweh or Allah will become very widespread among the true Israelites in the West. That will also become a time when large numbers of them will begin returning to the land of their ancestors, Israel. That journey will also take 40 years to complete, as it will include the complete rehabilitation of that desert area into a fertile greenery. All this was part of the prophecy. The covenants that Yahweh made were made during the revelation of this prophecy to Moses as well as to the prophets, that if they keep the laws of Yahweh, he will lead them back to the promised land, literally the land of Israel, as well as the metaphorical promised land of the true self remembrance. These two stories have been confused and mixed into one in the legend of the Exodus of the Old Testament. Moses did not lead the Israelites out of Egypt, as they were never enslaved there. On the contrary, during their suffering, the kings of Egypt were the ones who offered them sanctuary and protection. Egypt is used in that prophecy to signify the most powerful country on earth, which it was in those days, and what today means America.
Number 3. What is the significance of Yahweh's or Yeshua's or Jesus's death on the cross or stake? Was it that through following this exemplary life or words in all the prophets' life or words, the Bible and the Quran, and moral examples of believing he is the Son of God, the non-Black races could have eternal life and not perish? All races could avoid the hell experience through redemption or elimination of sin through believing in his righteous sacrifice or name? Or was his death and divine sonship a fabrication, distortion, or mix of various historical facts and myths that originated in previous times, like the Book of the Dead, Coming Forth by Day, Epic of Gilgamesh, Babylonian mystery system, paganism, ancient Black spiritual knowledge, etc.?
Jesus did not die on the cross. He was killed by his enemies and then secretly buried by his friends in the regular manner. During those times, dying on the cross was one of the worst forms of torture that a person could undergo. They hung the person by driving nails through his wrists and ankles. Then they broke all his joints and left him there to die. He died in the most excruciating pain as you can imagine. The early Christians thought it would be a good idea to say that Jesus died in this way for the sins of mankind. Many people who stopped to think about this came to the conclusion that one indeed had to be God or the Son of God to willingly accept such a torturous death. This is what today would be called propaganda, whose purpose was to get as many followers as possible.
All races could avoid the hell experience through redemption, elimination of sin through believing in his righteous sacrifice or name.
Read the chapter on the rapture where I explain why the Christians came up with the lie that all people can go to heaven or receive salvation through faith alone. What many people don't know is that much of the false doctrines that became a part of early Christianity and are still believed to this day were devised by extraterrestrials. They have been directing the course of Christianity now for 2,000 years in order to get it to serve their purposes, which fundamentally have to do with their genetic problems.
More questions I have. 1. If Christ did not die for everyone's sins on the cross or stake, should we continue to follow the examples of righteousness of all the prophets and the prophet Savior Jesus, who came to remind us of who we were by continuing to obey all of the commandments of Yahweh, specifically the one I'm concerned with so much, fornication? Or is it okay to be physically intimate or date when single until you find the right one to marry? And secondly, is it immoral to look at a woman's shape or looks in passing in a lustful manner? Or do these acts, dating in brief for a few seconds, staring or looking or lusting at a woman's body, someone you are not married to, result in more sin accumulation and therefore cause more suffering when the hell experience happens? Or is just not choosing to participate in perversions, porn watching, lying, hatred, stealing, murder, and living a fairly moral life, except for intimate dating or occasional looking, sufficient?
This answer applies to both questions because they're related. It's not a sin to look at a woman's body with the idea of sex in mind. This is perfectly natural and is part of the reason why we become attracted and eventually fall in love and get married. Sexual attraction is a large part of it. Now, having said that, looking at women solely for this purpose with no intent of ever having a responsible relationship with them is a sin. This type of behavior is what is meant by lust. The sole purpose is to satisfy the sex desire and nothing more. Someone may then say, well, what if I sexually try out several women so I can find the right one? First of all, you don't have to try out women in order to fall in love. Every man and woman knows this. Secondly, you cannot pretend to yourself. Every person knows deep down what his true motives are. In the mental realms, each one is stripped of all pretensions and their true motives become exposed. If your real desire was simply for sexual pleasure, then this love of sex just for its sake will follow you to those realms, and the suffering associated with its removal will be intense. It should be obvious then why adultery is a sin. For example, the person is already married, thus his sexual attraction comes with no responsibility toward a marital relationship. For a single man, the determining factor concerning his sexual activity is whether or not he has genuine intentions to marry that woman. Of course, you cannot in a short time know a person as well as you would like, so sometimes you may have good intentions to marry and therefore feel no guilt about engaging in premarital sex, only to discover later that the person was lying to you or putting up a false front. In that case, it's not your fault if the two of you split up. Your motives remain pure. People being what they are with the tendency to easily give into bad but pleasurable habits, it should be obvious then why the laws of the ancients lean more toward celibacy before marriage. It's much easier to avoid the temptations of sex if one stays away from it altogether before marriage. Once a man indulges in it, it becomes very difficult to abstain after that. From that point, the situation can get out of hand so quickly that one finds himself inventing all sorts of justifications that would not have been necessary had he not put that first foot in the water. In the past few thousand years, we got married much earlier than we do today to avoid these pitfalls. But the white man system today makes it nearly impossible to get married at a more sensible age, between 16 and 20 for men and 14 and 18 for women. The pull of sexual desire is very strong in males, and a man has to give it into it just once to understand this. Hence, the ancients taught that one should marry the woman first before engaging in sex. This responsibility naturally leans much more heavily on men than women because 99 times out of 100 women who give in to our sexual advances do so with the pure motive of attracting us to eventually marry them. Their motives in this regard are much more pure than men's. The second point is why do some men stay single for a long period? Is it so they can engage in responsibility free sex, or are there legitimate reasons? Again, you can fool everyone in this respect, but you cannot fool yourself. If your reasons are disingenuous, then it means you have a strong love for those desires that lead to sinful behavior, and the suffering attached to their removal is just as intense as the love you have for them. This applies to all the other sins you mentioned. A person who commits them willfully has to love for them, and the suffering and length of stay are in direct proportion to the love for them. There is great wisdom in the teachings of the prophets and saviors of this age. They taught always with an eye to the future, where they knew the laws of purification and balance can cause a great deal of suffering if a person does not prepare himself or herself right here on earth and learn to conquer the desires that can easily lead to sin. To see how seriously the ancient Egyptians took their moral lessons, take another look at the Egyptian book of Coming Forth. You'll see the individuals pleading with the gods of judgment that they did not give in to immorality. They even list all the laws one by one, which are more numerous than the 10 Commandments. These are the laws that help them to overcome the earthly temptations, thus making their 3-day journey in the underworld much more bearable or even quite easy in many instances.
Number 3, I have personally witnessed the power of uttering Jesus' name. Why does his name have so much power? And finally, a comment relating to the 3 days in hell experience. I can compare the hell experience, or 3 days, to when my body purifies itself of various toxins or foreign substances via mandrake root, for example. During the cleansing process, the more impurities there are in your system, the more uncomfortable or unpleasant the cleansing experience is, as you feel the toxins being removed or moving through your system. But right after you are completely cleansed, the unnatural or junk foods that you used to crave, at least for a time, are not only not desired, but sometimes even repulsive, because your body no longer wants what is unnatural once it's in its natural or original state. I imagine this is the state all Black people will achieve spiritually, being no desire for sin, after they are completely cleansed of the accumulated sin with spiritual fire.
The power in Jesus' name does not come from Jesus, it comes from you. Remember, Jesus is your brother. He doesn't have any more power than you. This doesn't mean he doesn't have power. He does have a lot of power, but you have just as much. You may choose to use it by invoking his name, others by invoking the names of ancestors, and others by using various rituals, but the power comes directly from us. Your last point needs no comment, is right on the money.
Hi, Blackroots. As a conscious Black person, I have noticed for many years that when somebody attempts to do something bad to me, there's usually bad karma that occurs. I had one person die, another in a wheelchair, also one committed suicide. Also, a person whom said they were conscious started talking bad about our people and showing Uncle Tom tendencies, now are suffering medical complications. This was after I told my ancestors that she will be punished. I know with this individual, they abandoned parts of their character and left themselves susceptible to illness. Is this the formula of messing with a culturally conscious being? Also, since I know that we are heading into times with natural light that can only accommodate our community and technology, will be left behind as the old energies will disappear with Whitey and his regime? I spoke once with a Rastafarian in Barbados, and he told me that we will be going back to horse and buggy. And a Black Muslim told me that we will have better transportation than what we have now. Where do you come out on this? As we conscious brothers and sisters head into this new cycle, and there is only one soulmate, will polygamy cease to exist? And what is the difference between sexual interaction in the future as compared with now, minus diseases and evils that exist now but won't accompany the new cycle?
About the people who do bad things to us personally, I've had the same accidents happen to them also, but never with Black people, only non Blacks. Just recently, one got a disease in the leg where it had to be amputated. Another lost his job, etc. This has happened many times. Now, the reason it never happens with Black people is because I have unconditional love for all Black people, no matter what they do. I understand the reasons why they do what they do. So I've never had to deal with what you call their bad karma. But because of my hatred for the non Black races, bad things always happen to them when they negatively cross my path or try to prevent me from achieving my goals. Polygamy will eventually cease to exist, but this will take a while because brothers are still in short supply due to being incarcerated or murdered by the enemy. So polygamy will continue for a while based on the need to love those sisters who cannot be with their soulmate for reasons beyond their control. I'll answer the question about sexual relations later.
Greetings, Blackroots. In response to your last email with concerning karma, there is one major clarification that I have to make. The individuals whom committed suicide, died, and ended up in a wheelchair are all whites. The fraud conscious sister is the only Black person, but I didn't curse that person. I simply told my ancestors this person is going to receive an eye opener, which would force this person to rid themselves of the sympathy of the non Blacks. As a brother, I only care about sisters, and I will have a family with one. I also, with my consciousness, I have noticed that the other lighter women do not approach me in a sexual manner. I have told my sisters in my circle that it is because I have a repellent against these other groups and don't put my energy to them, therefore they will not approach me. I believe if you constantly seek their women, the chances multiply. Sisters are the only type of women that I find attractive. To me, the other women are nasty and try to gain the features of our African queens. Tanning and injections surgically of various parts will help lead to their destruction against other things. They are the Delilah that is mentioned in the Bible whom weakened Samson. They want to take us down with them when they sink. Global warming is one of the things that will lead to their destruction. The point you brought up in your book about some of us will learn the lessons for intentionally trying to bleach our nation. Ezra 9 and 10 explains clearly how there is going to be a problem, as the strange marriages would have been reformed when the Israelites, referring to us, as the rest are impostors, will be restored. You can't bring those relations over to our golden age. Numbers 36 teaches what you stated, as it states there can't be anything left in their lineage because the genes of others are not a part of the inheritance. Deuteronomy 7:3 even tells us that Israel must not make marriages with them. Nehemiah 13 and 13:25 tells us how the children could no longer speak the Jews' language. Doesn't that remind us of today's mixed children who take Whitey's side? No different than in Egypt, where they took the lighter side to secure their future. I have done lots of biblical reading to back up my claims, and I see you are well read in this area as well. On a different note, isn't Korea with weapons going to be one of the things that destroys the non Black races, since these weapons are going to destroy their environment, speeding up the inevitable? Notice how all the lighter ones are battling each other right now. The Mexico border battle with Whitey, Native Canadians are having standoffs with Whitey in Canada, Pakistan, Middle East, China, and Korea against Whiteys, Babylon or Babyland countries, which are G7 countries. And notice how 7 is representing these countries who have wealth, false albeit, since what we will inherit will be much better. And it looks like it will hurt them in the end, since these nations are responsible for the wars and greed in the world. It's in Revelations especially. Hope to hear from you.
You are absolutely right, my brother. God has what we call divine love and divine hatred. Our divine love is reserved only for our people, and our divine hatred is reserved only for the non Black races. This is hatred without blinding emotions, a very intelligent kind of hatred, such as what you mean when you say you don't give your energy to the non Black race women. That's what it means to have zero sympathy for the non Blacks.
Greetings, Blackroots. I think I have solved one email question that I sent you concerning transportation. I used my third eye and came to the consensus that since we are heading into a new cycle with new light and the loss of present energies, the transportation would be based on light beam travel. Hopefully, you can inform me if you feel differently. This email is prior to your book coming out, and I don't know if it is going to be covered, although it possibly can be. I'm glad you are doing a book, and I will definitely read it, as this similar information was exposed to me a few years back from Southern Africans before seeing this website. Strange thing is, long before the internet, I've always thought of some punishment in the Bible and always believed it pertained to non Blacks only. In that consciousness, is that consciousness being alive in one's head, but only just needing to be exercised? I have many conscious material notes that I have taught, and I am planning to eventually write a book myself in the future. I love this information.
There are 7 modes of transportation that have always been used. Right now, we no longer use them because of the conditions of this age. The highest form is purely mental and instantaneous dematerialization. The next is based on magnetic energies, and the others are light based and electromagnetic. All of them will come back into use in the next age. The use of each type depends on the purpose and the user's level of initiatory advancement. I hope you've seen the book by now. It includes exercises that can lead you to the first knower in you.
Greetings, brother. I've read Blackroots Science 6 on Dusty.com, and I enjoyed the information you posted. but there are some questions I have to ask regarding certain subjects. If you don't mind, I would like for you to answer some questions I have so I can have a better understanding of our destiny in the future as Black people. 1. When you say Black people all over the world are the descendants of the 1,000,000,008,000,000, does that include quadroons, octoroons, etc.? 2. How is Yahweh the father of Blacks when he created the non Blacks? And when the non Blacks ascend, they go to his realm of heaven. Since Blacks in America mostly have a mixed lineage, where is our destination? 3. In 2010 through 2012, what happens to Black people born between March of 1961 and 2012? 4. If Blacks were on this planet 78 trillion years ago, does that mean that dinosaurs never existed? Was it a hoax? If so, how? 5. What will happen to white people in 2012? Will they just disappear?
I would advise you to get the full book. Most of your questions are answered in it. Quadroons and octoroons can be Black or non Black. By quadroon, people mean someone with one Black grandparent, but there are no longer any pure Black people in America and other Western countries, so the grandparent also has some non Black blood. It's very difficult to determine race biologically. One has to know the exact biological makeup of all the ancestors back to at least 6 generations and found out how much non Black blood they have. For instance, if a quadroon's grandfather was himself a quadroon or octoroon, then the grandchild is most likely not Black. His blood having been diluted beyond the 6th generation of Blackness by his parents, and yet some will call such a person a quadroon based on the fact that the grandparents is Black, even though there's that much non Black blood. Suffice it to say, if such a person has very strong intuitive identification with Black people, that person most likely is Black because that intuitive feeling comes directly from his first self. Spiritually, it's a simple matter because only those people who have the mind of God incarnated in them are Black. Only the 24 elders know who has the Spirit of God and who doesn't because it comes from them. They know the lineage of each person on earth down to the very beginning, to the 1,008,000,000 original people. Therefore, they are final arbiters of who is Black and who is not. 2. Yahweh is the father of Black Americans and all people of slave descent because these people are his direct biological descendants. They came from the island of Palan where Yahweh and the 59,999 Elohim made the non-Black races. 3. The first Black babies having the reverse mutation of our 12 DNA strands were born on March 20th, 1961. In 2010, they will reach the age of 49 years. That is the age at which the human body and mind reaches full maturity. They will begin to feel the effects of the 12 DNA in 2010. The children born between 2010 and 2012 will be born with the full spectrum of 12-strand DNA. There will be only a few of these children as the parents, at least one, will be over 49. After 2012, all Black children will be born with 12 DNA. This question is answered in the book. Whites and all the non-Blacks will continue to live on earth for another 1,000 years. During that time, the earth will be ruled by Yahweh, and it will be called 1,000 years of peace for Black people. The non-Blacks will have the opportunity to repent during this time. This applies both to those on earth and those in the hells. After this 1,000-year period, the hells will be destroyed. On earth, only a few non-Blacks will be left. Most will have died off due to their wars, diseases, etc., that will come soon, within the next 4 years. The ones that are left will die off naturally by the end of the millennium, around the year 3000. After that, there will be no non-Blacks left on Earth or anywhere in the universe.
I have one more request. Would you mind sharing with me some exercises on meditation so I can come into contact with my higher being? Does good health make it easier to perform such tasks?
I designed the second level of Blackroot science precisely for that. If you don't have time to do all of it, do only the last 3 lessons: dreams, feelings, and thoughts. Good health is vital to succeed.
Greetings, Blackroots. I read some of your material where you were talking about a spacecraft coming with aliens on board to pick up as many humans as they can for their survival. And then you went on to say that a second spaceship will come and Yahweh will be on board with the Elohim. When and where will these events take place? And how can Yahweh speak to everyone at one time if he's on one spaceship? What should people do in the meantime of these events? Live life to the fullest? I'm not trying to be rude by any means, especially if what you teach is true, but I would hate for you to change people's whole perspective on their spirituality. If people take your story to heart, it will be a major disappointment to them if your story isn't true. Me, personally, I'm not trying to be one of those people. In this day and age, there are so many people out trying to make a quick dollar any way they can. Seriously, sir, just for me being comfortable with the info you have provided, I ask you to please share with me something that I can do on my own to find out if all that you are saying is true. To be honest, I can't afford your book at this moment. I will really appreciate if you do this favor for me.
My book is free. You can download it at the below site. The chapters Rapture and True Israelites answer your question about the aliens and Yahweh. The exercises given in level 2 are sufficient to bring you in touch with your first self. The information I provide is not meant to bring fear. It's meant to do the exact opposite, which is to bring comfort and peace of mind. Black people have been assailed for many centuries with all kinds of lies by the various religions and non religions to the point where they are holding onto straws for hope. These straws, such as the heaven of Christianity, will all break because they are false. Instead of bringing hope, they will bring nothing but despair. My goal is to provide our people with some comfort and truth that they can hold on to until the God of this age, Yahweh, returns to earth. Now, you asked when these events will take place. They will take place between the years 2010 and 2014. First, there will be an increase in disasters and catastrophes on earth. At that point, a false Messiah, a white man, will appear and proclaim himself as the savior of all humanity. We as Black people are supposed to know quite easily that he is the false Messiah because he will have the mark of Cain on him. The mark of Cain is nothing other than white skin. Whenever you see a Messiah come who is not Black, then know for sure that he is a false Messiah. This man will work with the extraterrestrial races to prepare the Earth's population to be removed, those who are willing to go. There will be many such people, some Black people included among them. Soon thereafter, Yahweh will appear with the Elohim. Your second question is, how will Yahweh communicate with all people at once? This is easy. Notice in my book where I explain that all things that are invented in the world come from inside us. Everything that manifests outwardly is a mirror image of the perfect thing inside of us. For example, a telephone is a mirror image of the natural ability to call telepathy. A computer is a poor image of the human mind, and so on. Now, modern people communicate with the whole world using satellite television. This invention is a mirror image of the mind's ability to do the same, but more perfectly. A television station can transmit a particular frequency in order to communicate with only those receivers that are tuned into that frequency. Yahweh and his angels can also do this using their minds and do it much more perfectly. This is how they communicated with the prophets of old, whose minds were developed enough to receive those special frequencies. In those cases, Yahweh used special frequencies because it was not yet time to communicate with the whole world. But now that we have reached the end of this age, the time has come for him to communicate with the whole world. Therefore, he will use a frequency that will be received by the minds of people on earth. This is easy for him to do, much easier than modern people broadcasting to the whole world using satellite television. It is said in Revelation that every eye shall see him. This means every person on earth will see a vision in their minds. The vision will be the same for all, such that there will be not even be a question of it being a hallucination by a few people. Remember that this entire world belongs to Yahweh. Everything that a God creates in his mind, therefore the whole world has its being in his mind. That's why it will be a simple thing for him to communicate with the whole world at once. In the meantime, live your life with love for your people and no sympathy for the non Blacks. It's this sympathy for the devils that has led and will continue to lead many Black people astray to the point where some will become victims of the great deception called the rapture.
Greetings, Blackroots. I appreciate the feedback I've received from you. What you wrote was helpful, and also reading your response brought more questions to mind. Whatever I ask, please don't take offense. It's just that I have been around the Christian concept my whole life, and that may have some effect on my way of thinking. In your work, you are stating that we, as Black people, have morals and are not hateful. But yet you show white people no respect at all by calling them whitey and using lowercase letters when mentioning them and using capital letters whenever you write Black. In no means am I taking sides. It's just that I understand that every white person on earth isn't bad, and some of them have good morals. Second, when you say Yahweh has angels, isn't that somewhat a Christian concept? And how do they look physically, if you know? If what you say about Yahweh creating this world is true, don't you think it's unfair to people who had bad lives, imperfections, and all other sorts of problems living in this world without ever getting to experience the things they longed for or missed out just for his entertainment?
What the Elohim look like, I described in the chapter True Israelites. See paragraph 65. I also made it clear that I use the word angels not in the Christian sense, but to mean messengers. The Elohim are equal to Yahweh as gods. They're his brothers and sisters. Don't worry, I don't take offense at your questions. I show the non Black races no respect for a very important reason. Black people have been trained over a period of 400 years of slavery and colonialism to view with them as superior people. This is a dangerous deception and couldn't be further from the truth. For every up, there is down. For every front, there is back. So, also for a superiority complex to exist, there must be an inferiority complex to receive it. One cannot give without another receiving. So, when Black people view them as superior, they automatically view themselves as inferior. As long as Black people are at this stage where they almost worship these people, they will not overcome their inferiority complex in this world. It's not possible for a Black person to remember his or her first self as long as he or she has an inferiority complex. And it's not possible to overcome the inferiority complex as long as one thinks the whites, yellow, etc. are superior. So I disrespect them deliberately and for a crucially important reason, which is to deprogram Black people from this debilitating thought that we are inferior to anyone. This has nothing to do with emotional hate. You were better to call it a divine hate, which is an irrational type of hate. Black people are gods incarnate. They cannot realize the truth of this if they believe that there is someone above them, whether that someone is the non Black races or their non existent spirit God. I answered your last question in great detail in the book about why Yahweh made a world where there is evil and some people suffer. It's a very serious eternal purpose, not just his entertainment. Peace.
Hello, brother. Question. With all the evil acts, rape, murder, torture, exploitation, etc., taking place all over the world by all people, including us Black people, the original people, when we connect to all 12 DNA strands, or all 12 DNA strands are again active between 2012 and 2014, will these practices cease or be next to impossible to commit by us Black people? Another question. Please describe some of the images in the mental realms, plants, animals, trees, mountains, etc., as you have experienced them via rituals, if this is permissible.
Discussing the things of the mental world causes a yearning in people that can soon turn to sadness because it cannot be satisfied. It's safe only in a ritual setting as direct experience. It's not advisable to discuss the details concerning the worlds of our ancestors outside of the ritual space. You'll be rewarded by patience in this regard. The future things of this world on the other hand, are so close to the fulfillment that is allowed to discuss them. So I'll tell you about the coming changes of 2010 through 2012. The effects of the genetic changes will be noticed first by those Black people who reached the age of 49 years old in March of 2010. For example, those born during the spring equinox of March 1961. They will experience a mental change within themselves, what some will call a spontaneous enlightenment. This will come as a result of the genetic changes causing their previously dormant DNA to start being active. This activity will bring them closer to their original self, who's been waiting patiently for this moment in our lives. It is the contact with the first self that will cause the spontaneous self-awakening. 2 years after that, in 2012, the first Black children will be born in whom the DNA will be active right from birth. For the rest of the people born after 1961 and before 2012, they will experience the spiritual awakening when they reach the age of 49 years old. Therefore, it's all going to start as a very slow process, affecting a few individuals at a time. It will be highly personal and individual to the point where it will not be generally noticed worldwide. As the years go by, as more and more people reach this state of mind, then the whole world will begin to notice. After a period of about 40 years starting in 2010, it will be so widespread that the whole world will be talking about nothing else. So crimes and the like will continue for the next 40 years or so among Black people. As more and more hear of what is happening to individuals and believe it, then the mental attitudes will change even among those Black people who have not yet experienced it. They will see many signs of the awakening, and if they are aware enough to look for it. The first manifestation of the change will be noticed by each individual as a strong, almost uncontrollable feeling of love for other Black people, regardless of who or what they are. They will know for the first time the true meaning of unconditional love for their own kind. The non Black races will be adversely affected by this change in Black people. Their whole power base and successful oppression of Black people for the past 6,000 years has been upheld by their ability to come between a Black man and his brother and a Black woman and her sister. They will notice that their lies and deceptions no longer have the effect of dividing Black people and causing them to hate one another. This will mark the beginning of the end for them because they cannot overcome unity. Their power to rule is effective only on those who are divided or are caused to be divided by their clever deceptions and lies. The unconditional love among Black people will be caused by the original self in each person being close enough to our conscious mind for us to recognize the self in others. This sudden change in Black people, where they love one another, even into death for no apparent reason, will cause a lot of despair among the non Blacks. Those among them who have been blind or pretending to be blind to the fact that their whole power structure is based on the division or self forgetfulness of Black people will suddenly realize that without this self forgetfulness, they have absolutely nothing. They will realize that their world is coming to an end. I was fortunate enough during my education to be exposed to the type of mental and emotional change that will soon be the experience of all Black people. There are a few people that I met during one of our rites who have this type of unconditional love. It is almost palatable. It has such a forceful power that no one can stand in its way. Anyone who tries to come between two or more people who are in this type of love will be driven insane and completely lose control of his mind. This type of power has been absent among Black people for 6,000 years. The present world knows absolutely nothing about it. The only non Blacks who will survive it in the coming 40-year period are those who will stay out of the way or totally yield to it.
Hi, Blackroots. I have some questions, and I enjoy reading your book every day since it's come out. When our 10 inactive strands of DNA become active around 2010, will we all grow back to 7 feet tall? And will the physique of the Black men and women change to a muscular appearance? Will our immediate Black family be in the same family with us after 2012? The ones related that live with us, like our mother, father, brother, and cousins to us now, or even missing individuals? Also, will all Black males and females receive their soulmates if they don't have one leading up to 2010 and 2012?
Before I answer your question, I have to speak to my teacher. It involves information that perhaps he would not want me to make public. I'll tell you next week. In the meantime, let me send you a dream sent to me by one of the people during doing the second level exercises. He thought this dream was interesting, and I agree. It's very accurate about the near future, considering that the person is only a beginner, so to speak. Dream 2. This was a lucid dream. I was totally aware that I was dreaming. I woke up in a bed that was slightly above another bed with three people sleeping in it. Apparently, I had been sleeping in this bed. I saw a set of clothes near the bed. I don't know if they were my clothes or not. I looked in the trouser pocket as if expecting to find something. Just as I expected, there was money in it. It looked just like American bills, except that one of them was a $3 bill. They were all folded. I unfolded the $3 bill, and to my amazement, I read the following words in it. This is legal tender of Yahweh, 2025. The word Yahweh was spelled just like that. The other bed with three people in it was like a mattress on the floor. Fast asleep in this bed was a young girl about 4 years old, a young mother, and a small baby, maybe a few months old. The young girl was woken up by my noise as I got up. She looked at me. I waved at her to keep her quiet. She smiled. Since I didn't know what I was doing there or how I came to be sleeping there, I didn't want to wake the mother up. I took a look at the baby who was sleeping in her arms. The baby had the most beautiful black skin I had ever seen, just like his mother and sister. I left the room and closed the door quietly. I was now in another room when I saw another door. I opened it and it led outside. It was nighttime with a lot of bright stars. I left the door slightly open because I wasn't sure if it would lock me out. There were so many bright stars that I thought this must be a small town in the country, or if it was in the city, there were no lights to block out the stars. I don't remember seeing street lights. I started walking and saw some ultra modern cars driving by. They looked like future models of modern cars. They didn't make any noise and they didn't touch the ground. They seemed to be flying a few feet above the road. I saw one black man in a small car with what looked like red leather or plastic seats. It was open at the top like a convertible. All the cars were open like that. I remember thinking to myself, it probably never rains around here with so many convertibles. But just then I saw one with a closed roof. I kept walking and saw graffiti on the walls of some buildings. It was in a language I could not read, but I saw one in English. Although I don't remember what it said, I think it was the names of people. The dream continues, but this is enough for sending to you, Blackroots. Here's the rest of the answer to your question. I will tell you as much as I'm allowed to tell. First of all, those who seek their friends, relatives, and soulmates will find them. Communication is going to become very different after 2012. It's going to be more mental. Moreover, it's going to become possible for some people to live up to 1,000 years after the rekindling of our dormant DNA, but the body will not necessarily grow taller. Now, let me tell you something that has been a secret for 6,000 years. Remember, I mentioned that the Great Pyramid was built to have 7 functions, and that one of the functions was to be used as a resurrection machine? I explained one facet of this resurrection that has to do with the transportation of the soul to another star system. In this case, to the star Sirius, when Yahweh and the Elohim were transported 6,000 years ago. There's a second facet in the resurrection. Underneath the pyramid, there's a large temple. This temple is excavated many feet below ground, and the pyramid was built directly above it. The shape of the pyramid has a quality that lends itself ideally to the purification and preservation of energies, including life energies. If you took a pyramid shape and placed it over a bowl of fruit, for example, and aligned it in the same way as the Great Pyramid, i.e., have its face aligned with the north, south, east, and west, the fruits will stay preserved for many days. The ideal material for such a shape is stone because it practically lasts forever. This quality of the pyramid is important for the temple that exists under it. Inside this temple are the perfectly preserved bodies of the 144,000 judges that lived 6,000 years ago. The judges themselves ascended at that time to unite with the minds of the 24 elders. You may remember I mentioned that when the time for making of the non-Black races was approaching, the ancients gradually depopulated the earth of all of the perfect people in order to make way for the new kinds of people, those with only two active strands of DNA. They stopped having children, and the Earth's population was reduced by 144 million people every time each generation passed. The last group of people to ascend were the 144,000 judges. They did not die as we die today, i.e., unconsciously. Their death was conscious, as was the passing of all the ancients of that time. In the case of the 144,000 judges, their bodies were not buried and allowed to decay. Instead, on the day of their ascension, the body of each judge was placed inside the temple for preservation. These 144,000 bodies are the bodies of resurrection spoken about in the Bible. They are identical to the bodies of the 144 chiefs and the 24 elders who are still alive on earth today. One of these bodies of resurrection was seen by many people 2,000 years ago after the death and resurrection of Jesus. The underground temple is built of stone. Superimposed on the stone is a magnetic field that completely surrounds the entire temple as well as each individual body inside. It was put in place by the chiefs, and they are the only ones who can remove it. By doing this, they made the stone harder than diamond. There is no tool that can scratch the stone, let alone move it or penetrate it. This temple was discovered by modern archaeologists in 1936, a decade or so after the discovery of the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Since then, they have been making more and more sophisticated tools to try and force their way through the stone. They have failed every time. Magnetism is the highest substance of the universe. It can be penetrated only by the mind that can replace it with an equally strong and neutralizing field. But like all substances, magnetism also has a wide spectrum just like light, which ranges from below red, infrared to ultraviolet. Modern scientists only know one frequency of the magnetic spectrum, the kind that is generated electromagnetically. They do not know the higher frequencies, such as the one used in the construction of the temple walls. It is the highest of all frequencies of the magnetic spectrum and is available only to the chiefs. They think that the stone is just some type of extra hard granite that they can eventually penetrate given the right kind of tools. They have even tried their most powerful explosives to no avail. When Jesus' body was taken from his murderers by Simon, he was in a coma, not dead. In those days, the non-Blacks did not understand that a person can be in a deep coma for days without a discernible heartbeat or respiration. To them, such a person was dead. Since they usually buried their dead within a day or two, quite a few times they buried people alive who were in a coma who subsequently died of suffocation. Now and then a person would rise up from his coffin just as they were about to bury him. This always caused havoc due to the superstition and ignorance about the comatose state. Now Simon was aware that Jesus had fallen into a coma. He took him and laid him in a crypt and nursed and cleaned his body for 3 days until he revived him. After he revived him, Jesus consciously left his body, which then died and was buried in the secret place. The soul of Jesus, with the help of the two Elohim angels in John 20:12, then entered one of the 144,000 bodies of glory, or bodies of resurrection, that are underneath the Great Pyramid. Mary Magdalene and others who saw him did not recognize him at first because the ancient body, although it has a likeness to his body of that time, was much blacker, taller, and more perfect. As an initiate, he was able to dematerialize the resurrected body at will. All ancients who had completed a certain stage of initiation were able to do this because of the nature of our ancient bodies. Hence, Jesus was able to move from place to place instantaneously and to enter rooms and buildings without walking through the door. The ancient bodies, with their 12 unified and active strands of DNA, are very responsive to the mind. That is what enables them to dematerialize easily at will. But they can also take on any other mental conditions according to the person's state of mind. In other words, if you enter this body and you still believe in illness, you can make it ill with your mind. Thus, it requires a clear mind at all times. This takes a while to achieve after resurrection due to the fact that the person lived in a relatively imperfect body for a lifetime, such as our present bodies. Thus, it requires that a person must spend many days, up to 40 days, before he gains full control and function of the new body. After that time, the body is no longer affected by the imperfections of the previous body that are still in the person's mind. So during the first few weeks of his resurrection, his glorious body took on the imperfections of his previous body, notably the wounds inflicted on it that eventually led to his death. That's the reason it was crucially important that he not suffer any broken bones, as prophesied in Psalms 34:20 and fulfilled in John 19:36. It was customary in those days when an innocent person had been killed by soldiers or a mob for the murderers to break his bones according to their superstition to prevent his ghost from rising and haunting them. This was prohibited in the case of Jesus, and the soldiers were prevented from doing so. Otherwise, he would have taken those wounds in his mind to the new body and would have been unable to stand or walk in it for 40 days. After about 40 days, his mind stabilized perfectly. The wounds disappeared and the body returned to its natural condition. I've used the case of Jesus to illustrate the process of physical resurrection that has been misunderstood for over 2,000 years. This same process that Jesus experienced was also experienced by others, such as Elijah. It will be experienced by many ordinary people in the coming few years, all of whom are incarnations of the same God who were the last judges who surrendered their bodies 6,000 years ago to be preserved for this very purpose. The 144,000 bodies in the underground temple are in a perfect state of suspended animation, for a lack of a better word. There are no biological or chemical processes going on in them, thus no decay. They are as supple as the day they were laid down. When the resurrection occurs, I'm told it's as if the person is waking up after being asleep for about 10 minutes. He and she is as supple as one who just lay down to rest for a moment. The bodies are preserved for the people who are to become the new judges of the Black nation. They are to be the foundation of the new society. Each new society requires a minimum of 144,000 people, 72,000 men, and 72,000 women in order to form. This number is the minimum required for the necessary genetic variety to avoid inbreeding. It is from them that the population will grow until it reaches the maximum of 1,008,000,000. The number corresponds to the 144,000 aspects of life, as each judge embodies one of the aspects. As they begin to give birth to new generations in the coming 1,000 years and beyond, they will rebuild the society of the Black nation. Hence, there will be 144,000 Black people who will resurrect in the ancient perfect bodies. They will consciously give up their old bodies and resurrect in the ancient bodies that are preserved in the temple. When the knowledge of the bodies of resurrection was taught to the initiates of old, some of this knowledge filtered out into the general population of the uninitiated during the times when Egypt was ruled by priests and pharaohs who were of mixed race. They misunderstood the teachings, which were not meant for them anyway. They were meant for those among them who were initiated. Nonetheless, this knowledge filtered in a distorted form to many others. This misunderstanding led to the establishments of the ancient Egyptian practice called mummification. Some of those priests believed that they could resurrect their own bodies if they could find a way to preserve them. They invented many kind of techniques for preserving the human body and got so good at it that to this day, some of these bodies still survive, although not in any state where they can be brought back to life. Every person who could afford in those days had his body mummified with the hope that at some point in the future they could be brought back to life. This cult was a gross misunderstanding of the teaching about the true bodies of resurrection that are preserved perfectly without the use of chemicals, but rather by an arrangement of the Earth's magnetic field under the control of the mind with the help of the preservative quality of the Great Pyramid. As time went on, they realized that the mummified bodies could not be resuscitated. At that point, they revise their motives so that as to continue to perform this practice, which brought them a lot of riches. They now said that mummification helps fast the resurrection in the afterlife, and that became the new teaching. Part of the process of the initiation requires that a person should purify his or her body by proper fasting. At the same time, he or she should train the mind to make contact with all his memories, which will help him or her to eventually make contact with the original self, who is the self initiator. At that point, the person will then have an understanding of self and other, i.e., an understanding of God and the devil, the non Black races. This will lead to a conscious mental resurrection whereby he or she will eventually attain conscious bodily resurrection. This will be easier to do after the year 2010 when a rekindling of our dormant DNA will occur. Those who have prepared themselves through fasting and mental exercises will be the first to awaken. All this was planned to take place now at the end of the rule of the non Black races. The mentally awakened and bodily resurrected people will become the new long lived judges of the Black nation. They will increase in population over the coming 1,000 years and beyond. As the judges give birth to many children and the population of perfect people increases, more and more Black people will incarnate in the newborn perfect bodies until the population reaches 1,000,000,008 million, thereby ushering in a new age of everlasting peace on earth.